very much a barrier. If I couldn't share the Frenchness in me to my daughter, she wouldn't be able to speak to her grandmother, her great grandmother.
Right.
There's so many books and things I remember from being a child, or toys, and I'm like, the instructions are in French, into board games, instructions, and so much of it would be, I can't do that because she can't speak it. I think that it would genuinely hurt me if she wasn't able to even understand it.
Welcome to Coffee and Geography, where my guests and I geek out about the world and everything on it, discovering that we are all geographers in some way, shape or form. I'm your host, Kit, and my pronouns are they, them or she, her. So settle down with a brew, hit that subscribe or follow button, and enjoy the listen. Bienvenue au Café et la Géographie en français. Les enfants dorment. Oh, je suis content. Allons-y. Bonsoir, Mr. Vis. Ça va?
Bonsoir, ça va très bien, merci beaucoup.
Arrête, Kit. I'm stopping. Sorry. I can't do it.
It was good.
I was just so rusty. For anybody who actually speaks French quite well, I wonder if that was the equivalent of running your nails down a chalkboard. So I do apologise, everybody. But what would you give me out of 10?
I'd probably give a French a harsh marker, so I'd give 6.5.
Oh, okay. I'm pretty pleased with that. Bearing in mind I haven't spoken French probably for a decade. Okay, let me explain why I tried to open in French. So, because my guest, Louis, born in Belgium and French, born in Belgium to French and British parents. Louis was brought up as a third culture kid, and this helped him to develop a strong interest in people, places, and the world around us. And Louis moved to the UK in 2011 and has since settled in Bristol and is now head of geography in a local school. So, another geography teacher.
Indeed, yeah.
Which is brilliant because, as people, regular listeners have been hearing by now, is that even us geography teachers are quite diverse folk.
Yes, I think that's nature of the subject. People are fascinated by the world, and people in it sort of are attracted by the subject that allows us to understand better.
Yeah, seriously. And what I'm getting, regular listeners again, is like what is probably getting the sense of this is that even though most of my guests have been geography teachers here in the UK, which is obvious because that's the circle I'm in, that's one of the communities I'm in, but have already getting a sense themselves that there are so many different characters and characteristics and experiences that come in to make it, and we do get typecast, don't we? So, listeners, when you think of geography teacher, I bet if you type it in Google Images or Ecosia Images, what kind of sense you get? So, when you were little, then what would you have pictured a classic stereotypical geography teacher?
When I was little, in a very weird way, and it's something that I noticed when I moved here. On my first day of my PGC, I said to my then fiance, I was like, I'll go in jeans and a polo shirt, and she's like, there's no way you can do this in England. We're all in uniform. So I was already, so in my head, a geography teacher was like in jeans and with like a Quechua sort of walking jacket for like trekking in the Alps. In the UK, I feel like the kids always see them with elbow patches and a tweed jacket, but that would have never been. You wouldn't see a teacher like this on the continent, but in the UK, apparently, elbow patches is the thing.
And I don't know if folks remember this, and this is going to be hilarious probably to people not in the UK, but the press who, I less said about that bad, but the UK popular press, the tabloid press, compared Jeremy Corbyn, the ex-leader of the Labour Party, as a geography teacher. Like, he looks like a geography teacher. And you know what really kind of like, I was kind of like cringing and kind of like laughing at the same time, because and I don't know if he's listening, so I do apologise if this is the case, Nigel, but my old head of department and my old ex-colleague kind of was a caricature of that kind of Jeremy Corbyn look. It's like kind of way he dressed, and the peppery beard and
there's something in it. But
there is something in it.
I would be nowhere near it because I don't own elbow patches, and I can't physically grow that good of a beard, so that's kind of scuppered.
No, and the same here. And I like to my beard and facial hair days are way behind me.
Yeah.
Thank heavens. But nowadays, so when I go into schools, even if I tried, I couldn't dress as a classic geography teacher anymore. I'd like my, wearing dresses with foxes on them or something
But
like
I was
that,
going
which
to
I guess
say,
is naturally like.
in
But
a controversial way, I think is a bit of so I always only wear chinos, shirts, and bow ties. That's my thing. And on
bow ties.
Fridays, I wear tie because I dress down. And so I think you have to be you have to be a bit quirky, and I think that's what the geography teacher is. It's a bit of
Yeah,
quirkiness.
yeah, totally agree with that. Totally agree with that. And I would be, I did do that a few times. When I used to wear things like ties and stuff, it would be like kind of the classic world tie and stuff like that.
Yeah,
World
exactly.
map tie. But yeah, now and then, but of course, when it's I suppose the thing that you can't avoid, of course, because it's appropriate wear, is when you go on field trips. You have
Yes,
to wear those wellies or those
absolutely.
very strong waterproof hikers and the North Face
All the
jacket
gear.
and all the gear. And like, yes, of course, if you're going out the field, of course you dress like a geographer. Well, anyway, so we're digressing now. So we are the podcast for people who haven't or are listening for the very first time. It's called Coffee and Geography because this is a chat like it is in a cafe, and we are drinking some brews. Well, actually, I would admit this is probably one of the first times during the podcast that I'm actually drinking some water from my water bowl. I've had one of those days. But what are you drinking, Louis?
I'm going to say something odd because everybody's got coffee, tea. I don't have anything with me now because I've just finished dinner.
Fair
And
enough.
we finished a bottle of wine, which is
Oh, yeah.
which to my biggest regret as a Frenchman was Portuguese, but
Oh,
it's still decent. But yeah,
but okay. So let's come to that straight away. Then let's segue immediately into that. So we have someone born in Belgium to French and British parents drinking Portuguese wine. You said to me before we started recording, as like, I'm just like so European. It's like,
yeah.
so you just, as I said in the intro, you describe yourself as you was brought up as a third culture kid. So okay, so let's go from that. Let's talk about your identity as a person then. So you're I guess therefore you're half British, you're half French,
Yeah,
but
correct.
do you feel more than that then because you were talking about your grandparents and everything
Yeah, so
a bit earlier?
growing up. I think it's always been not flexible, but it's evolved with me. My identity as a where I'm from, if that makes sense. Because that was a classic question. It's like, oh, where are you from? I'm like, "Phew, where do I start? How long do you have?
Yeah.
And I think it was very much. Mum was French, dad was English. They worked. We were in Brussels for the European Commission, which is where my father worked. And as growing up, I always thought all my friends were in an international school, and I didn't really have any friends in Belgium because they're all non-Belgian, if that makes sense. And
Yeah.
every time there was a holiday, boom, we'd jump in the car and go somewhere in the UK, up to York, or down to Lyon in France. And so I always thought Belgium was like, oh, when I got out of Belgium in 2011 to go to uni, I thought, oh gosh, that's it. I've nothing linked to Belgium whatsoever. Um, and I really missed it when I left. I
Oh,
really missed it. And I've got a Belgian nationality, and I think it's by living elsewhere, I've sort of appreciated how much I have by being so split around. But equally, when you grow up, I remember my sister and I always found it a bit odd to not be 100% of something.
right.
And
Okay.
it's even little things like you'd go to friend's house and you'd play some like board games, and they'd come up with like a if it was some acting or charades, and you'd come up with like a TV presenter of the 1980s in France, and we're like, no idea who they are. And then it'd come up with a Friends character from obviously the TV show, and all my French friends were like, never heard of that. I'm like, well, who are you guys? Never having heard of Friends. And so it's always, we weren't fully immersed in French culture, we weren't fully immersed in the English culture, and we were a bit of, let's say, 75% of everything. And there were moments as kids we were like, oh gosh, we're literally always different. And now I
Wow.
actually really like being different, and I make it I make it a big part of who I am. And so I big up the French here massively. But if I go to France, I'm sure I'd big up the English part humongously. So yeah.
That is so fascinating. I wonder how my family, my kids in particular, feel that way, being half American and half British, but they live in the UK.
Yeah.
Whether I don't know. Perhaps it's something to ask them when they're a bit older and they're able to
It'd
reflect on
be
it. But
Yeah, it'd be
yeah.
interesting because I think what would be even more interesting in the case of your children is the fact it is the same language. So
Mm,
there's a chance that they'll be more likely to see the same TV shows, etc. But
yeah.
there's some culture you just can't assimilate. And I noticed that especially with my daughter. She's 17 months, and when she was born, I definitely wanted to speak French to her and only French because my dad only spoke English. I was in a French school and a French mum. Everything around me was in French, and so we learned to speak
Ah.
English to dad. Mum and dad spoke English, and everything else was in French. And we mumbled the two languages for ages and ages and ages. But now I've got both, and I think it's so valuable. And I decided I definitely want to do the same with my daughter. My wife speaks good enough French to understand and not be excluded of the conversation. And initially, it was a decision I wanted to. But actually, the more I bring her up, the more I realize I wouldn't be able to do it otherwise, just because I don't know English
Mm.
nursery rhymes, I don't know English like storybooks. There's some instinctive things I'll be like, I remember this as a kid, but I don't know it in English because I was never in England as a child. I think I wonder how other parents find it, but it's just hard. You can't make it up. Basically, you can't come up with a kind of soothing song if you don't know it in another language.
This is brilliant. I mean, I've spoken to quite a few guests now from around the world, and I think this is the first time actually. I mean, this is what, the 37th, 38th episode that I've had someone tell me this. This is a really interesting insight for me, and I think a lot of people listening might be thinking, "Crikey, never really thought about it that way before." Because especially with, I say this with a lot of sadness and a lot of upset, and I've said it on the podcast before that it's something that upsets me quite a lot. That during the time when we were, the EU 28, where we
Yeah.
were able to move around and the melting pot, I was hugely proud of that, of the
Oh,
fact that
that's,
we
yeah,
could,
yeah.
really have a whole continental scale melting pot. And I think what you have is a product quite, and you say you've now come to peace with it and you actually celebrate it as a product of that.
Yeah,
And
hugely. And you
it's
always.
lovely.
I think it's important to celebrate it, and I think I've interestingly had a few conversations with people who always go, "Oh, you're going to teach her to speak to her in French," and to my daughter, and I'm like, "Yeah." It's like, but she's going to speak later. I'm like, I know. I spoke at the age of 2, haven't stopped since, but it took me ages to start talking.
Yeah.
But equally, majority of the world's people speak. Actually, being a monolingual, I think is how you pronounce it in English,
Mm.
is probably a minority, I'd say, in the world, because the majority of people will speak dialect and their language, or the language and
Yeah.
something else. But here in the kind of westernized world, it's still seen as, oh, but you've got a bit of an accent, and I think as a kid that was the hardest. Oh, where's your accent
Right.
from? And you never fully had. I had an English accent in France, or supposedly, and then in England I had a bit of a French accent, and it wasn't
Right.
more. It was more of the intonation than the accents. And I still make mistakes now. I say words, and the kids in class go, "So it sounded a bit weird. I don't think that's how we say it." And it's just because I get the
Yeah.
intonation wrong. But I think that's I laugh about it now. But as a kid, I was always thinking, "Oh gosh, my English is not good enough. Oh, my French is not good enough." And I think, yeah, I think for a lot of children who grow up as bilingual or trilingual or even more in some cases in the UK or elsewhere, I think it's important to, whatever happens in politically in your outside world, remember that it's a luxury. It's a massive luxury to
Yeah.
not have to. In the words of a friend of mine, she was like, "I'm spending 9 grand a year in uni to learn something you got by birth," and she was doing
Wow.
French, and I was like, "It's a good point. Actually, you didn't have to
Yeah.
pay for that. It just happened."
Yeah. No, it's, and actually, I think a lot more of us can identify it if we really think about it, especially if those of us who've, migrated within our own countries. So
Yeah,
you take me. I didn't go very far from where I was born and raised. So I was born and raised in the county of Essex, one of the home counties. My dad is Cockney from East End of London, so I have that. So when I first moved up to Norwich, a lot of people did have trouble understanding me because
yeah,
I had a
it
very
is different.
strong Essex Cockney hybrid accent, and that's changed. So it's the same
Mm,
sort of thing. So and because you were talking about not just the language but also the dialect, the intonations,
yeah,
and everything like that. So that's really, really fascinating. And I've got a story to tell everyone. It's the first time I was seeing it, and this is actually an excuse to say hi to one of my old best friends, my best friend from primary school called Ivano, and I'm going to get Ivano to listen to this. We haven't been in contact with each other for a long, long time, which is fine. Our paths have diverged. We're all doing our own thing now, which is great. But I do think of him a lot because he was a very good friend of mine at primary school. And one of the best memories I had was, well, we'd gone to secondary school. Now, we went to different secondary schools, but our two families got together because, you know, it's be nice to catch up kind of thing. So Ivano and I must have been 11 or 12 or something like that. And his parents had invited us over to dinner. And it was the most brilliant. I loved his family. His family were lovely, absolutely lovely. So Melba, his mum was from Colombia.
Okay.
Salvatore was from Italy. And I think, and I could be mistaken, but I think Paola, their oldest daughter, and Ivano were born in the UK. But so, and then there was this time that they had this. I don't know what we don't to this day know what they said, but there was something that happened over the dinner table when we was all having our meal, and Salvatore was kind of saying something very sternly in Italian. Melba was responding in Spanish, and Ivano in English was going, "Yes, I know. Stop it!" And it was like, oh, it was brilliant, and I felt quite privileged to be in that, sitting at that table, even at that young age of like 11, 12. I thought, this is actually really cool. I really like it, and I'm very envious of. But so I'm wondering, so Ivano, if you're listening, I miss you, buddy. Do connect with me. I have precious memories from when we were children. But yeah, I wonder like how folks like him, you know, him and his sister Paola would think, because they probably had the same experience. They didn't quite fit maybe in the English culture, maybe when they went back to Italy or Colombia, maybe
it'd be interesting to know, because I think it all is about the kind of community you have around you and the support network you have around you as well. And obviously I was talking to a few other friends who were saying it depends on what the extra language is. So in the UK, French is it make my life easier just because it's still seen as cool. You do it in school. Evie's gonna have like whacking time. She's gonna smash her GCSE French. She's gonna have a laugh when she gets to school.
Do it when she's 5.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's not gonna be that hard, and she's obviously probably gonna pick it because it's going to be easy. But if it had been another language, which would have been harder, like I don't know, Persian or Turkish, it would have been a lot harder to kind of use. And some people when I'm around town, it's half term now, and so it's just her and me. When we go out and about, you get people who try and say hello or bye in French because they hear us speak French. But that's interactions you have the luxury of having, because France is only going to be 21 miles away from Dover. But it's not going to be the case if you spoke an indigenous language of somewhere a little bit further afield. And I feel like it'd be interesting to see how some families do it, if they have a language that's in a minority language, as well as being a minority language as a whole in the world, not just like French or Spanish or Italian or something a little bit less classical. So yeah, it's something I've always found fascinating: the language barrier and the identity, understanding your own identity and where you come from and how you embrace it. And there's always moments in your life where you don't want to embrace it. You want to kind of hide behind it or not show it at all. And it's always, I think the more you grow, the more you meet people, the more you realize, okay, more and more people are actually interested in the fact I'm just not one thing. Brussels helps because Brussels is, I mean, the fact that you're EU based there, wherever you go, you hear people babbling in all sorts of languages. And same as you were mentioning in your memory, for me, I love that. Even if I don't get a single word of it, but hearing people in Danish, Italian, Greek, Turkish, whatever the language, I'm like, this is so cool. Can't understand any of it. Wish I could, but I just love hearing other things. Thinking, gosh, it's great to know so much diversity.
Yeah, it really is, and this is something why it's so precious to make sure we support. Because you mentioned about, you know, the less well known languages, the indigenous languages, things like that. It's to make sure that those don't go by the wayside, and we support them. And you know, so many people are their culture is embedded within their language.
Yes, absolutely. It'd be very much a barrier if I couldn't share the Frenchness in me to my daughter. She wouldn't be able to speak to her grandmother, her great grandmother.
Right.
There's so many books and things I remember from being a child, or toys, and I'm like, the instructions are in French, into board games, instructions, and so much of it would be, I can't do that because she can't speak it. I think that it would genuinely hurt me if she wasn't able to even understand it. And what she does with it after, she might have a few years where she goes, I don't want to speak French back to you. So be it, we'll see. But at least you'll have a basic knowledge and understanding of the culture.
Yeah, that's it. Because it's a connection to your identity.
Oh, hugely.
So language is, and it's yeah, I've spoken about language quite a fair bit in previous podcasts, episodes, especially in season 1. And the story that I always loved to speak was when I was living in San Francisco and working in San Francisco, and these folks from I can never remember what their indigenous culture was called, but they're from like the west coast of California traditionally, all the way up to through the west to the Pacific coast into Canada. And Giselle Martin, I've been trying to get in contact with her to actually get her on the podcast, but I think she's contact details have moved on, so might have lost the opportunity. But she gave a fascinating talk about how, for example, the culture that she's from has like 10 or 12 different words for tree, because it means different certain things, like the stage of a tree's life and what it can do for the environment, what it can do for humans, and so it's just incredible.
It's kind of how they're connected to, because that's how their society works, if that makes sense. But I think in my curiosity here, I know there's from a French point of view, the very little differences between English and Americans, as in kind of culturally. There's a lot of differences, but culturally, language-wise, how I'm sure that still come up when you went to San Francisco. Even though you've got American family, you were still the British one, weren't you? I presume.
Certainly. Yeah.
How does that feel? Because it's kind of I think it was the word. I can't remember what. It was an essay I had to write on EAL. It was a Australian academic who called it immigrants that blend in are the ones that surprise people the most, because they arrive, they look like everyone else, and then suddenly you go, oh gosh, I didn't expect you to be different. And that's exactly what happens when you're an Englishman, I presume. Yeah.
So for the folks not sure, so EAL stands for English as an additional language. Yeah. So just because we got some non-teachers as well, because teachers and our acronyms, we love those. So yeah, I mean, how do I feel? Oh, well, actually, San Francisco is a pretty diverse melting pot anyway, so I don't think I got much bats of eyelids then. But I did go with a friend. I did go and visit Michigan and the outskirts of Detroit. There was a friend there that I visited, and there was like hardly any like folks from other countries there, and like just ordering something at the local like Wendy's or whatever it was, it's like, oh my god, you're British. It's like kind of reaction, like in Love Actually, for those of you who've seen the movie Love Actually, when he goes to Milwaukee and they're just like, oh, say table, and it's like table. Go, oh!
That's the impression I get from films. Literally that. I was wondering if it was that intense or if it was just films.
But again, what am I focused on? It's not like about how I go about my day, or the not even things like the weather and things like that. It was really focused on the way I spoke, and my accent and the words that I use. Is like, what you say, trolley rather than car, it's lift, not elevator, and so like all that kind of stuff. Pavement, not sidewalk.
I've heard a lot of teachers in school now start to moan about the other way around, going, "Oh, kids nowadays they can't use words like they'll use words like elevator instead of the lift, and they go to the bathroom instead of the toilet." And I think with the more and more Netflix and the
restroom,
exactly. There's a lot of people who start using words which are to a English ear Americanized. I think that's by nature. More and more people who learn English will learn the one which has more people in, technically.
Hi folks, a chance for you to recharge your brew, but also a polite prod to remind you that it's so easy to support this podcast. Simply liking, sharing, rating and reviewing means that it will get on more people's radar. Also, there are a few links down in the description which may be of mutual benefit. Please do check them out. Right, let's move on to something that you put in your bio that I'd like to speak about. And you say that in terms of being a geographer, you say that wherever you go, you always end up taking too many pictures of geographical features and landscape, but you do end up using them in the classroom for your teaching and on Instagram. So you say, I also always want to understand how the areas I visit formed and changed over time. And that's a very geographical
It
thing, isn't it?
is.
The one thing that really captured my attention to this subject is I felt it gave me the ability of having like X-ray vision. So I could look at a landscape
It's
and
through
I could
different
look
lenses.
beyond, what you can just see on the surface. So I always used to say to people, the thing I love about geography is that I don't just look at a tree, I look at a whole micro ecosystem. I look at how that tree might be providing shade, how it might be hosting different organisms.
Yeah,
If it is a potential resource, if you let it grow, it will do this. If you chopped it down, it would change the landscape like this. And they're like, yeah, but it's just a tree. It's like, I know.
yeah, but even the type of tree and
Yeah.
for me, I mean, it's talking about a tree. One of my most vivid, I think, sense of smell is one of the most powerful ones. It can bring you back down memory lane. And
Yeah.
a few years ago, my grandparents used to have a flat in the south of France, and when they sold it, I was youngish. And a while ago, I remember smelling eucalyptus leaf, and it took me back years, and I
Oh,
was like,
wow.
gosh, I know exactly where I was when last smelled one of those. I think, and yeah, for me, eucalyptus tree, and you hear about anyway, eucalyptus as being some bad trees because they grow everywhere and they're not native, but the smell just takes me back to the south of France coast. Um, I think, yeah. Anyway, you're right. Trees aren't just trees.
Yeah. So, let's ask you a question. Is there any place that you've visited or been to, taken loads of pictures of or whatever, where you've kind of like, you could have, if someone didn't like click you out of that geographical kind of zone, and when you zone it, you're just like so fascinated. Has there only been anywhere like that where you've just end up, you go, oh my god, I took so many pictures of this one
Yeah,
place. You got a
yeah.
place like that?
Two. One is Norway. Hands down has to be. If I had to move to one place in the world, it'd be Norway. I was near somewhere called Gunvangen, which is on the railway between Oslo and Bergen. We went for a hike, and we were at the top of the fjord, and you can see the fjord bend and the kind of U-shaped valley and the perfectly smooth edges to what was the glacial valley,
I'm
and
picturing
how
it
it's all
now.
straight, and the eostatic change of sea levels. I was just like, oh, this is so much
Everything.
geography in here, and I took so many pictures, and I use it year on year on year in my slides. And I can go on and on about that part of Norway in general. It's just so much geography everywhere you go, constantly. You've kind of got the snow line behind you. It's just, yeah, it's phenomenal. That is definitely the top place I took too many pictures in. And the other place is kind of blowing my own trumpet here, but there's an island in Croatia called the island of Vis.
Ooh.
We're not owned by ourselves. We'd very much like that to be the case. It's where actually discovered Mamma Mia 2 was filmed. And obviously, Dalmatian coastline being a big case study of a concordant coastline, we every time I talk about the concordant coastline, I always say, well, one of the toughest rocks out there is the island of Vis because it's one of the ones that sticks out the most. Therefore, it's a hard piece of rock and it's never really been eroded that much. So us Vis lot were really, really tough. And I've got so many pictures of me around Vis signs in Vis town, and I showed I've got it on my Instagram. I showed the kids. And the kids are always like, "Oh, so this is ridiculous," and I'm like, "I know, but it's fun, right? And it's a cool place, and it's of all the places you could have an island, it's a pretty cool place to have one."
So
So yeah,
the
that's the
island
other
of
place.
Fis, yeah, it's a
Yeah,
small Croatian island in the Adriatic Sea. It's the furthest inhabited island off the Croatian mainland, once known for its thriving fishing industry in the late 19th and 20th century, having gained considerable notoriety for its isolation during the times of Yugoslavia. The present-day industries in the island are agriculture and tourism. Okay.
yeah. So it used to be a military base during Tito's rule, and then
Okay.
they filmed Mamma Mia there because I can't remember why, but so there's a few things that have happened there, but it's not that big, but it's cool. It's cool. So I'd probably say those two are the two places that come up again and again and again in slides, just for the anecdote of me and the other one just being a cool country.
Cool. Oh, excellent. Okay. So yeah, I don't know if there's got to be some place in the world that's called Rackley. I mean, a lea is like a place or a meadow. and a rack like an old agricultural tool. So it's like,
I didn't know that.
apparently, I know I've been trying to work out the etymology, but that's pretty cool. Right? Okay. So Lou, we're going to spill the beans now because I want you to talk about speaking about memories
Yeah.
of you. Well, you can correct if wrong, but age 5, you drove a train through rural France.
Yeah.
Okay.
I spoke. My parents came to visit last weekend, and they corrected me. Apparently, I wasn't, because I thought I said I was 10, and they're like, "You weren't 10, you were younger." But I wasn't quite 5, so I think I must have been about 7. Wasn't for long, but it was me, my cousins, and my sisters who were 4 under the age of 10 who relayed each other to drive the said train under the supervision of my grandfather. And it was basically, my grandfather was a what we call a cheminot in French, which is a train driver, and they retire age 55. And so he was the second husband of my grandmother, which explains why he was grandfather age 55, quite young. But anyway, he so it was his last ever journey. He was retiring. He was his last journey back into his home village of Amberieu, and from the last stop before Amberieu, so it's on the line from Geneva to Lyon, we hopped on and did the last leg with the whole family in the cabin. And I remember being sat there. All you have to do is I'm sure there's more technicalities than this. I'm sure he had his feet on pedals or something, but I just remember pushing a lever forward and just easing it off when you had to slow down. And
wait, did this train have passengers?
Yes, but they had been told. They weren't told it was young kids driving, but they were told it was the last train journey of the driver. And the reason they had to be told is because in France, on that last leg, they put I can't remember how many meters, they put the little fireworks. So every time the train goes over them, it just goes bang, bang, bang. And it gets faster and faster as you get closer to kind of the end of the line. And so if they hadn't been told, it was pre a lot of horrible things in the world. It probably would have freaked out a lot of people to hear, regular bangs. So it's just like mini fireworks just to celebrate the end of his driving career. And then after that, he was retired, and we had an awful lot of time with our grandfather, which was quite cool.
Oh,
so that was an anecdote. Yeah. I've got a picture of it upstairs in the attic somewhere.
Oh, if you are happy to share that, you should share it.
Yeah, I need to go dish it out. I'll
stick it on your Twitter or something.
Yeah, I'll do that. But really get a nice memory of being in a train. It's the only time I've driven a train. So yeah.
Okay, wonderful. So one feature I'd like to play with you now, and that is Jog On. So Jog On is where I give you 5 topics, randomly chosen, and you have to pick 3 of them to talk about. You can talk about them any way, shape, or form. Maybe you've got an experience on one of them. Maybe you want to make some geographical links, or maybe you just have some random funny anecdote about anything. And just to confirm, Louis, you have not been told these 5 topics in advance, so you've not been able to prepare.
No, I haven't, which is quite nice actually, because it relieves. There's no stress of the podcast.
I know, teachers, we have to prepare for everything. Yeah. Okay, so you can pass twice, basically.
Yeah.
So, okay, the first one, and I don't know if you maybe have an old family member who this might bring to mind, but the first topic is pipes. Now, I'm going to go, because you talked about like the girders of buildings or something like that, Kit. No, I'm going to go for the classic smoking pipes.
Stuff. Because I was thinking with what's in the world at the minute, pipes and transport of energy could be quite interesting. But pipes to smoke, gosh.
That's what I'm going to go for. Take a hike on that, is it?
The only thing I could say about it, does it have to be geographical?
No, you can say anything you like about pipes.
Because the only thing I'd say, then I'll jog on with it and say the pipe is probably one of the most famous Belgian features, because we have a famous painter who has Ceci n'est pas une pipe as one of his main paintings. I'm pretty sure it's Magritte. Belgium will hate me if I get that wrong. Is it? It has Magritte or Monet, I can't remember. Oh gosh, I should have taken a hike on that one.
Listeners, anyway, you can look that up.
It's one of the famous Belgian paintings, yeah.
Oh, sweet. Okay, well, nicely done. Right, the second topic is artists, which is, you kind of touched on that, but artists.
Let's jog on with it. And I think one thing I I don't know. I think it might be because I'm a geographer. Every time I watch a TV series or film or listen to music, I always want to know where they're from. I don't know if that's just me, but I always end up Wikipediaing them or
Me
putting them
too.
on Google. I always check like
Yes,
where they're
wiki
from.
buddies.
What
High five to camera.
what school did they go to? Like where did they come from? Where were they born? And I think it's because nowadays so many people sing in English or are famous for things in the English world. I'm always surprised when people are from somewhere else. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
I watched the Around the World in 80 Days on BBC iPlayer recently, and of the three main actors, there's only one Brit in there, and I was like, gosh, you really wouldn't have known what some of the others weren't English, and I quite like that because it shows how, I don't know, again, it highlights a bit of diversity. So I think, artists are a really nice way of getting to know places you might not know of otherwise.
That's a good way of putting it. Right. Okay. Now you've got 3 topics, and you can only talk about one of them.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
you can like pass on the next 1 or 2 to take a risk on whatever. But this is where the completely pointless fun comes. You know, it's false choice. So the third topic is bridges.
Ooh, I'm gonna. I want to take the risk and skip 2 and go to last and take the gamble of talking about it. But being in Bristol, bridges is
Yes.
I'm gonna have to take. I'm gonna have to.
Yeah,
Yeah. No, bridges are pretty awesome. I just love looking at them. We've got the Severn Estuary one, which closed. Both closed during the last week because of the storms.
Yep.
And you forget how vital they are to communication networks. I mean, colleagues having to go around to Gloucester to get to school. Thankfully, schools closed, etc. But there's a big Welsh contingency in Bristol and vice versa. And if you close a bridge, like the Humber Bridge in Yorkshire, which is not far from my grandmother's, or these 2 Severn bridges, or even, I think there's a ludicrous bridge between Macau and Hong Kong. There's this, they allow trade. Ottawa wasn't one of the bridges closed there because 25% of Canadian trade goes through it, and it was shut down because of the protest by lorry drivers. I think we underestimate bridges.
Yeah, that's why Trudeau invoked emergency powers.
Yeah, because they were blocking the bridge. I think
because it was that much of a strangle on.
Bridges are just like one of these unspoken heroes of modern globalization.
That's true.
But
yeah. No, I think that was a good shout to talk about that one. Okay, so actually, I think you made the right choice because one of them you pretty much just your sheer existence like covers it, right? Okay. The 5th topic was actually Europe, and I'm not lying. It comes up randomly, so we're cool with that. The 4th one was buffaloes. So you can't. All right, so actually it worked out quite well. I think it worked out. Yeah. So we got your half term in Bristol at the moment.
Yeah.
And one thing that I never really asked any guests for people is on the podcast, is particularly with geography teachers, is the thing that what do you try to get up to? Is there a myth to dispel with regards to half-term holidays? Because there's this common thing, isn't there, with regards to not being at school, that it's all feet up, don't worry about it, stop what that. Because I've been with my job, I've still been communicating with teachers at a school who should be on half term at the moment because we're sorting out careers stuff and things like that. But and I know that actually the answer is it depends on the individual circumstances.
Yeah, I think
so. For you, what is the kind of half term kind of school holiday process for you as a teacher who's a teacher in Bristol or a teacher in England?
Yeah, for me it has to be. I'm militant about how I organise myself, and it's a full shutdown of, unless exceptional circumstances like teacher assessed grades, etc., of nightmares of the last 2 years, which have required a bit more over holidays. I have to shut down. Otherwise, for me, it's a matter of, usually I'm not always in the country. My parents came over this half term to come and see me. Otherwise, I'm back in Belgium to see my parents, or France to see my grandmother. So it's my kind of chance. I work hard in the term, and the half terms I'm out. And my colleagues are lucky to have me in the country if I'm here at all. So I think if I am here, it's very much like the boring. Let's get the MOT done and just go to the dentist and do the thing. All the appointments you can't do because you can't pick up your phone when you teach. So you can't book anything. So that's a kind of That's a half term I'm on at the minute. My parents came over to see, and then I've done the dentist, and I probably need to do the hairdresser and stuff like that. But
Yeah. And this is all important stuff. And I think
life admin, basically.
Yeah, life admin. That's a really good point about it. And I think that's something even, I was guilty of, was allowing, school to encroach on, because there's going to be people who have never experienced teaching or the teacher profession, or don't have any connection of some kind, and they only see it from the outside looking in.
Yeah, I think it's difficult to understand it if you see it from the outside.
And so some people might be thinking, oh, well, Louis is quite clearly managing to have these half term. Well, actually, but sometimes you've got to need to do this because you've got to catch up on life in general, and also if you continue working, you work intensely during the term, and we're not just talking about a 9 till 5. You could, for me, sometimes it was a 7 to 7 day.
Yeah, I think it's definitely a routine and a kind of a structure. And I've had 5 years of teaching before my daughter arrived, so it's not like I was new at the job with kids. That made a massive difference because I did have, my wife's a lawyer, so her hours mean I probably work a bit longer sometimes just because she's not here yet, back home yet. And now there's my daughter. I look after her, but in the first few years when I had to set everything up really and get the ball rolling and build my kind of arsenal of teaching equipment, I was able to build it. And I think it's also kind of very boring life story, but my wife and I did long distance for about 6 years, and so it was all, when we were in uni, it's always like the weekends are to go and see each other. She was in Oxford, I was in Sheffield, and we commuted and then somehow always moved around, but never together at the same time. It all works out. We're still all in Bristol now, but it was a kind of, if I didn't organize myself, I didn't have the weekends, and it's just stayed, and it's a habit I've just stuck by. If I work in the week, the weekends are free. So it's just, but I think I'm now at that stage now because I've had so many years of practice, which has helped massively.
Yeah, and I know some teacher friends who try their actual best to try and keep work as close into the school day as they possibly can, and they do go home at, like, say, 4 o'clock, but then they leave it deliberately to the weekend or to the half term, and that's the way the way that they cope.
Cool. Yeah, exactly.
But it sounds like we got very, very parallel experiences, because the same happened with me. My wife and I were dating while I was doing my teacher training, so she was over living with me from America, and then I actually spent the first couple of years of my teacher career with her back in the States. And I've mentioned this before on the podcast, to my shame, that I would go quite often, almost as many half terms as I possibly could, or Easter holidays, and fly over and see her.
Yeah, because you can make it, if you want to make it work, you make it work, but it's rubbish. But because it's rubbish, you try and make sure every time you can, you have the freedom to be able to do it.
But I was taking my work on the plane. I was marking work on the plane. In fact, I used that opportunity to kind of catch up. So, but yeah, that was my personal circumstance.
I think it is all down to organization, but I'm also very lucky to be in a school that's incredibly supportive.
Yes.
They do genuinely care about the well-being, and I've got a really, really competent team. All these things do make it easier for me to be able to have that.
It really does. Yeah, and I probably wouldn't have been in the profession for as long as I was if I didn't have the same sort of support. So I think those people have listened to every episode. They've probably pieced together my whole entire career narrative and the various reasons why.
On the last episode of the last series, you should have a quiz, be like, right, in what episode did I say?
Oh, that's not a bad idea, actually, because I don't know whether I can, with the likes of Andy giving me the word of anti-disestablishmentarianism and stuff like that, I don't know if I can write another poem. But anyway, which leads me quite nice, segueing onto We Are All Geographers and connecting the words. So folks who are new to listening or have forgotten, We Are All Geographers is a way of linking all of our guests together, where they come up with a word where they try to link it to geography in the very loosest sense. Now, last week, we had a delightful listen with Helen Ellis, who is fantastically creative map maker and visual artist, and I really hope you did check out all her stuff. And she was given the word connection by James Cheshire. And now for you, Louis, Helen.
That's the one I've been thinking, gosh, what are they coming up with?
Oh, it's a lovely one. It's a nice one. Helen, a lovely, lovely person, and she was very, very kind to give the word openness. So a
I like
nice,
that. I like that.
a nice one. Yeah. Yeah, we're still trying to come down from Andy's a few weeks ago, so never going to let him live it down. So yeah, so Louis, you have whenever you feel ready, you have 30 seconds to link the word openness in any way you so wish, in the loosest possible sense, to geography. So I am prepping my timer for you, and when you are ready, just make a start.
Okay, openness, I think, is basically that's what geography is about. It's about opening up to the world, understanding the world, and making sure understanding how we're connected to one another. I think we live in a world at the minute that is very much everyone for their own gain, and I think being more open, being more embracing of each other's cultures, understanding of each other, is the best way to live with 7.7 billion people on the planet. Is to be open, be willing to listen to one another. So I think being openness is the best remedy to current problems within society.
Perfect. And absolutely agree. I mean, there's nothing quite like geography to open, your mind. So
Yeah, absolutely.
I thought I'd throw that one in there.
Yeah, it's a good one. It's a stereotype of geography, but it is a way of
Really? Yeah.
opening up the world to the classroom. You're in the classroom, but you can open so many other doors just from being sat in a
Yeah.
geography lesson.
Yeah. And we were talking about the differences in culture between like the United States and the UK. Geography, the way that they don't teach geography, it's like, or they think geography is just maps, and yet half of them can't find a certain anyway.
But
I'm not going to go on that.
yeah,
So
but you say that, but France is the same. As in, we teach geography, but geography is history and geography, and that is the teacher who does history and geography
right,
only does the human geography, and then the person who does the oceans and the volcanoes and the earthquakes, we call that sciences et vie de la terre, SVT, which is science and life of the earth. And so I remember asking to a friend saying, what would I teach if I was in France? Because geography is split up. And he went straight to the point. He was like, you teach English? I was like, okay, probably have a point there. But it's, in France we split it in half. One's half is in science, one's half is in history. Which is, yeah.
Yeah, I really, yeah, because I always have to explain myself whenever I talk to friends and family in the States. I was like, yes, geography is, and then they're so like bug-eyed when I say, yeah, we cover this, we cover this. Like, well, you do what? You teach everything then? I was like, well, you said it, I didn't. But okay, so the word that you would like to give our next guest, what would you like to offer?
At the risk of being very vague, I feel like I'd have to go on the word identity.
Okay, I like
Just
it.
because it's vague, it's broad, but for me, it's a big part of how I define myself. It's my identity. So yeah.
I love it, and I think next guest is going to have a really good crack at that. I'm really, really excited to talk to the next guest. It's an ex-work colleague of mine who has a very, very interesting identity. So that's going to be awesome. Right. So to finish off, some shout outs that you would like to give. You gave a little bit of a shout out to your school and your colleagues and to your wife. Is there anyone else you'd like to give a shout out to?
As a whole, just a geography Twitter community. I don't know. I know I've named or seen a few names pop up on the podcast, but it's just a really supportive. It started when I started my career here. Obviously, didn't know many people other than my PGC cohort in Oxford, and I'd moved to Bristol, and it just helped to have some people to kind of quite in a creepy way. You kind of quietly follow. They don't really know you, but you follow them, and you kind of. It's just nice to know you're not the only one there.
Yeah.
And then obviously it's my sixth year now here, and the Bristol network of teaching in general and humanities especially is really, really strong. So I think, I
David Rees, we'll give David Rees a shout out because
recommend coming to Bristol.
Yeah, he keeps having a go at me. He's like, you never mentioned me. I was like, well, I have now, David. Right, David. So there you go, done it. Yeah, and all the Bristol folk. Great. So you said you've mentioned Instagrams. You got Instagram and Twitter. So how can we find you on those?
So it's at Mr. Vis Geography in both. And the Twitter one is very much more of a professional kind of interaction with other teachers.
Yep.
The Instagram one is genuinely developed for in bringing geography to people's homes. Just because I'd set it up in lockdown 1, and we kind of, our students disappeared, and we just saw them online. We did so, but I couldn't bring. I'm a massive geek. I collect flags since I'm age 7, and every week I've got a new flag behind my desk linked to the topics in the news. So Monday's Ukraine, obviously.
Yes.
And
our thoughts go out to the folks in Ukraine.
Absolutely. Some pictures have been heartbreaking. And it's kind of, I always bring geography, whatever type of geography, into the classroom. And I suddenly realised I couldn't. And I had kids email me saying, so what's the flag for this week? And I thought, well, actually, if I make a virtual classroom, and it's purely like students can't comment, nothing. They can just see the pictures. And it's just very much to show them illustrations of what they've learned in class, what I've seen in the news that links to what we're studying, what I've read. And I'm pleasantly surprised with how students have engaged with it. Even parents, when you go on field trips, their parents engage. So I think it's just a nice way to use social media in a positive way, and in a kind of 21st century way. With so many lockdowns, is coming incredibly handy.
Yeah, and I think having a little bit of a positive use of social media is never a bad thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, because it can be a bit of a cesspit.
Yes.
So,
for sure.
So that's absolutely brilliant, and so people should go check that out. Okay, well, thank you very much for joining me, Louis. It's been absolutely wonderful.
Invite.
Yeah, it was wonderful to connect with you. So we've chatted quite a fair bit on the Twitter sphere, as we mentioned, but this is the first time we've actually sat down and had a bit of a chat. So it's been wonderful. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening. We hope you had fun. If you haven't already done so, please subscribe so more stories and experiences can drop into your favourite podcast app. If you fancy being a guest or have any feedback, follow us on Twitter at coffeegeogpod and send us a DM. Or you could email coffeeandgeog@geogramblings.com. Until next time, keep geogging.